Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form. It's by DeAtramentis, Black Brown, which is a kind of curious color, but we'll get into that. Yeah, the two pens that I used were these, kind of. This is the JinHao X450. And I love my X450s because pretty much all of them have been pretty broad and pretty wet, even though these are just the standard nibs they came with. And not this Parker vector, but a Parker vector in fine. I have like 4 of these. Yeah, and these pens are actually known for being pretty dry and very moderate, and this one certainly is, so, or the one I used. Oh, who's texting me? Anyways, that's embarrassing. Thought I'd try and find some other inks that this is comparable to. In the test, I reference Noodler's Nightshade because there is something almost purpley about it. I mean, it's definitely got some red, but at times it almost hints towards purple. So, yeah, here's DeAtramentis Black Brown. Here's DeAtramentis Johann Sebastian Bach, which is so ridiculously similar, except it's maybe a little bit more red. But yeah, I know that they've like renamed them or add smells or something. But anyways, DeAtramentis Sepia, which is a bit more red and maybe a bit lighter. And then DeAtramentis William Shakespeare, which is identical to Sepia. So, And then Diamine Merlot, which is, I don't know, yeah, it's Merlot-ish color. I'm gonna, when I do that review, I shall discuss that. But anyways, check out the chromatography, because there is something weird about this chromatography. Now, this is the one that, you know, how you're supposed to do it. Put the little line of ink, and then you instantly drop it in water. And you can definitely see this gray. See this very distinct gray, and it hazes up. And then you get this brown, that's kind of the end color product. But then you get this like bright, it really is that bright. It's not quite red, it's not quite pink, it's almost like a dark salmon color, I don't know. But here's the one where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it. But you can definitely see that dot got darker, that haze got lighter, we have less of the brown, but that red is much more, or that salmon whatever color, is much more distinct. So, yeah. My dogs are freaking out. Now, I thought I'd see what this ink could hold up against. Now, here's water, which definitely got that red-pink stuff moving, but that gray really wants to stick around. 1/3 bleach turned it like a swampy green, which I can't explain for the life of me. Denatured alcohol did absolutely nothing, which is why I'm not testing it anymore. Ammonia pen flush really started to break it up, but mostly got that red moving. That gray wasn't moving much more than the water. And hydrogen peroxide just sort of made the red disappear, but the gray still remained. Now, paper tests. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Yeah, if you're familiar with my videos, then you're probably aware that when I have multiple pages of the same kind of paper, it means something went wrong. So, I believe I started out with this, which is sort of just like, you know, from a legal pad of Clairefontaine. And as you might be able to tell, there's sort of like a woolliness and like a haziness. I wasn't getting a lot of shading, and then I was getting this, I mean, it was doing weird stuff. It was feathering. It looked like it was spreading along the edges. Something just felt wrong, so I decided to test it again. So I went to this Sayez paper. But I was getting more of the same, particularly along the edge. I was getting some feathering. I was getting some near spread. I was getting some weird stuff going on. And again, it was kind of like woolly and the scrubby. And I talk about DeAtramentis syndrome in some of my other tests. And what that is that I have found, and almost universally throughout my tests of DeAtramentis inks, that the longer it's out of a vessel, so whether it's a vial or a bottle, and left in a pen, the performance takes like an exponential nosedive. So I try and test these inks when they're still pretty fresh. And this one was less than a day old, and it was doing this. So I didn't really understand what was going on, because we were also having this stuff. So I went and got part of a page out of my sort of everyday carry notebook, and the thing is we were kind of having more of the same. Not nearly as much. A little bit of feathering. And it was just in the odd place, but it was still, well, but something was still, just felt kind of weird. And I was getting a lot of hard starts, which didn't make any sense, because this is such smooth paper, but yeah, it was still kind of woolly. I didn't know what was going on, but at this point I just tested like pretty much every Clairefontaine I had. We didn't really get bleed through or show through or any of that stuff, but it was just something worth noting. Something was off. But yeah, anyways, water test, and they were all pretty much the same. As you can see, it dyed the page a bit, and what's at the center is that dark gray. And once again, the more ink you put down, the more remains, so that X450, you can tell which dots and lines were the X450. But yeah, next up is Fabriano paper. It's 85 grams per square meter. It has more of a texture than Clairefontaine, but not the kind of like fibrous kind of texture where you think it'll get like caught between the tines and cause problems. It's not a steamroller smooth as Clairefontaine. It's not ceramic coated like Rhodia, but I found it can handle a lot of inks that other papers sort of really struggle with. So yeah, this one handled it like a champ. The fine vector took 17 seconds to dry on here. The broad and wet JinHao took 25, which when you see how saturated this ink is, I mean, even in the smeary, it looks, I mean, there's a lot of color in that. There's a lot of ink in that. And you get this nice shading, but it's still pretty subtle. I started to see this, it almost like it had a haze to it that looked like it wanted to sheen or that it could sheen. So I was pretty hopeful about that later on down the road, which caused some problems, but yeah, well behaved, no bleed, no feather, no spread. I said maybe there's some echo, but I think that's just in this area of the scrubby where I was laying it on trying to get some of that sheen. But other than that, I really don't see it. And as I said, 90% fewer hard starts, which I find sometimes more textured paper helps with that, because you've got this gap, you know, between the ends of your nib, and when you've got sort of textured paper, it's like these little bumpies that are sticking up, and it can sort of bridge that gap between the tines and sort of, you know, it's almost like it reaches up and like pokes the ink and it comes down. So I've found that sometimes textured paper can kind of help with that. But anyways, that was the weirdest description in history. Water test, much like before, kind of dyed the page a little bit. You get some of that, it actually is kind of like that weird salmony color. But what's at the center is very clear and pretty dark. And once again, the X450 put down more ink, and you can tell which bits are which. So now, next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. My dogs are freaking out. And once again, I've started to get some weird results, so just to be sure, I retested it on this teeny little bit of Rhodia. But I still got kind of weird results. As you can probably see, it was still kind of woolly through here. So yeah, I don't know. But the fine vector took 16 seconds. The broad and wet JinHao took 24. You do get some lovely shading. I hope that'll show up. There's something about this that kind of like hints at purple. But yeah, the dry times do kind of make sense when you think about the density of the paper and the coating and the saturation, because this is a very saturated ink. It's got lots of ink in it. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen. I don't really think it has any echo, even in the scrubby. But yeah, water test, much like before. Sort of dyed the page that vaguely pinky salmon color, and the gray at the center is pretty there, pretty dark, and pretty unmovable. Now, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out dry times and shading and sheen, and it kind of did all of that. You do get some shading, some very noticeable shading. The fine vector took 17 seconds to dry. The broad and wet JinHao took 29. So if you're a patient person and you love broad wet pens, maybe not this pen paper ink combo. But yeah, so like I saw on the Fabriano, there was something in it that looked like it wanted to sheen, so I tried to lay it on pretty heavy to bring that out, and I don't think this is going to show up on camera, but there's sort of like this hazy gold, like matte sheen all through the scrubby in the JinHao scrubby, but Yeah, I'm not gonna get it on camera, but I kept laying it on pretty thick because I wanted it to show, but I very nearly put ink through the paper, which should be practically impossible on Tomoe River. But yeah, you get this lovely shading. God, what is going on today? But yeah, you get this lovely shading. It's an interesting color. I really don't have anything else quite like this that isn't another DeAtramentis weird brown, purple, black, red ink. But, yeah, I mean, this paper doesn't do feathering or spreading or any of that stuff, so we didn't get any of that. But this paper does love to let ink slide away when you add more water, and that is kind of what happened here. It did get a lot lighter than we saw on the slightly more absorbent papers, so there is that. But it's still pretty there. If you had to recover that, I think you could. Once again, it dyed the page, and what's at the center is mostly that gray. But again, the more ink you put down, the more remains, so. Now, for the next 3 tests, sorry, my chair is quite loud. Next 3 tests, I only use the fine vector, except to write the names. Here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper, and here it kind of helps prove that title. There's a lot of spread. I mean, let's just compare the writing here with this. I mean, this looks almost the same as that, right? That's with the JinHao. So, yeah, there's a lot of spread. Here, because it doesn't have that shading, it sort of stays lighter, and so it touches less on that black, quote-unquote, brown-black. 2 seconds to dry. Again, it never looks undersaturated, but it does look kind of woolly. You do get feathering. It's not entirely pleasant. And this is a fine nib, and it's actually slightly, I mean, it's super moderate. And this isn't a very wet ink. So the fact that we get this, I feel like really proves just how terrible this paper is. That's a lot of bleed, considering the factors, but yeah. Now, absorbent paper tends to suck the ink in and make it harder to wash out, which is definitely what happened here. Look at how dark that is. I mean, the gray at the center is almost darker than this brown up here, which should not be possible, but what's funny is you get these very clear shoot-offs of that weird salmony color. But underneath that, that gray is very clear, very dark. If you had to recover that, I think you absolutely could. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's very cheap, and it's thinner than 20-pound copier paper, but generally it tends to outperform the 20-pound copier paper lately. As you can probably see, there isn't nearly as much spread. There is some feathering, but lately this paper tends to do that. I don't know why. But as you can see, like, there are some areas of like near shading. 2.5 seconds to dry. And look at that. Really not bad. Compared to this, there is like essentially no bleed except in the scrubby and up here with the JinHao. That's lovely. If you're someone who has to use this paper and you compulsively have to write on both sides, this really isn't so bad. Now, this paper hates water. Usually weird stuff happens when you add water, but here, no. Look at that. That gray at the center, very clear, very there. Isn't feathering, isn't exploding. The only stuff that's making a mess is that pinkish red salmon stuff that's kind of shooting off. Lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate. It is the bane of my existence. It is the closest thing I have in this world to a nemesis. I hate this paper. Anyways, it hates ink, and that's abundantly obvious. Took 5 seconds to dry, despite the fact that it clearly soaked in, because look at that, it looks like a wet ball of yarn. And crazy feathering. I mean, it's most noticeable in the JinHao, but it's the same everywhere else. And you don't really get shading, you just get this weird color separation thing. It's nasty looking. Ugh. And again, despite this being a very moderate, fine nib, and this isn't like the world's wettest ink, we're getting bleed everywhere. We're getting dots, and what's weird is we're getting like dots that fully came through, that like got onto the page below. It's not like there was this gradual, no, like that you can tell because there's like a spread of color through there. I hate this paper. And unlike every other paper we've seen so far, where like the gray was very stationary and the salmony stuff washed off, no. Look at this. This gray at the center actually started to feather. It started to explode. It started to break up. It started to do weird stuff. And the paper actually almost started to act like chromatography paper. It was trying to pull that inky color up. I mean, ugh. I hate that crap. Anyways, so there you go. There's DeAtramentis Black Brown. It's definitely not the darkest brown I've ever encountered, but it's certainly fascinating. It's like a chestnut maroon with weird vague hints of purple. Something weird was going on with my Clairefontaine, but it looked pretty good on Rhodia, and it looked fantastic on Fabriano. As I always advise with any DeAtramentis ink, people, keep it fresh. Mo fresher, mo better. Oh god, I'm going to cut that out. Anyways, for your consideration from the AAA Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.